that will indicate that there is a disease coming. What research is being done in this area and what money is being spent on it?
The noble lord is absolutely correct. Whilst we made good progress in many areas, pancreatic cancer is the hardest one, and the one where we need to do more. And that's true all around the world because of the symptoms are so hard to detect. I will happily write with the details in terms of giving the answer on that.
My Lords, that concludes oral questions for today. We now come to questions to the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs. First oral question, Lord Robertson of Port Ellen.
I seek leave to ask the question in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, since February 2022, we've committed over £4.7 billion humanitarian and economic support to Ukraine. This year, the UK is providing $1 billion of support to Ukraine's budget through loan guarantees and £127 million of humanitarian support for Ukraine and Moldova. During my recent visit to Ukraine, I announced further support to Ukrainians directly impacted by the invasion, $10 million for Ukraine's Red Cross Society to provide medical supplies, $7 million to volunteer organisations delivering humanitarian assistance. My Lords, we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
My Lords, I thank the Foreign Secretary for his answer, and I refer to my entry in the Register of Interest. Can I say how much we all welcome him here today for this first monthly interrogation in the House of Lords, which I'm sure he's likely to enjoy. After all, by his very presence in this chamber, he's given a fillip to those of us who have to go around saying, "Do you know who I used to be?" But can I commend him on the fact that his very first visit as Foreign Secretary was to Ukraine, because the Ukrainians are not just fighting for their country and for their land and for their lives, they're also fighting very much for us. And surely the fact is that they don't actually need more visits and more speeches. They need more weapons, they need more guns, they need more ammunition, and they need more equipment. And in that context, therefore, could I ask the Foreign Secretary this question: why was there no additional military aid offered in the Chancellor of the Exchequer's autumn budget? And why is there no perspective on military aid for 2024 when the 2023 money is going to run out in a few weeks' time in March next year?
Well, can I thank the noble lord for his question, and also say that I absolutely remember not only who he is, but who he used to be, and he was an incredibly effective Secretary-General of NATO and did fantastic work. And it's actually worth recalling some of the things that he said to President Putin back in the day in 2002, 2003 that are very relevant today. To answer his question directly, I mean, I think we have given £4.6 billion of military support. We'll continue to give the support that's necessary. One of the things I found very impressive about going to Ukraine is how much they rate our support, how they refer to us as their #1 partner. And it's been very good to see that. I think the one area where we can do more is in trying to mobilise the British defence industries to produce the stocks that are needed rather than simply running down stocks. We can also work with European allies to sometimes, if they are reluctant to give support, they may be able to backfill some of our capabilities and we can give more. But I'm absolutely clear the military support is essential. That is what is helping Ukraine to succeed.
My Lords, in joining in the welcome to my noble friend and wishing him every possible success, does he share my concern at the slowing up of the counter-offensive in Ukraine? And will he make it a particular study of his to see what can be done to increase the weapons supply so that these brave people, who, as Lord Robertson said, are fighting for us, do succeed?
I thank my noble friend for his question, and well remember when we were on the campaign trail together in Staffordshire. He was rather more successful. He fought Staffordshire South, I fought Stafford, and Stafford fought back rather effectively at the time. What I would say to him is I think we should actually be clear about the success that the Ukrainians are having. I mean, it's not much remarked upon. Of course, the land picture is one thing, but what's happened on the Black Sea, where the Ukrainians have pushed the Russian Navy right back across the Black Sea, sinking a number of their ships and opening up this grain corridor for ships. And that is essential because ultimately we need the Ukrainian economy to grow. They are now, ships are sailing, exports are moving, the economy is growing. They destroyed about a fifth of Russia's attacked helicopters in one night recently. So yes, there's been a difficult picture on land, but overall big success. And combine that with the fact that this country is now knocking at the door of both NATO and the EU, that is a very positive picture for Ukraine that I think it's important we get across.
Welcome the Noble Lord to his position and to your Lordship's house. My Lords, it's clear that whatever the outcome of the war, economic support on a considerable scale is going to be needed in Ukraine for many years to come. This has to be an international effort led by Europe, and if there's to be a coordinated European response, the UK has got to be at the heart of it. So what institutional framework involving the EU and the UK does the Noble Lord propose to ensure that economic support is provided in the most efficient and effective way?
Well, I thank the Noble Lord for his question. I think there are two answers to that. One is the EPC, this new body that brings together EU members with other European countries, including the United Kingdom. That is a good forum in which to talk about our support for Ukraine. I think the other is the Ukraine Recovery Conference, which we hosted here in June, and that will be a regular fixture. Other countries will host it, and that brings together everybody to try and make sure we maximise the economic support. And I think it marshalled something like $60 billion of economic support for Ukraine. So I think there are ways of making sure we combine effectively with European partners and others to get this essential assistance in place.
My Lords, in answer to Lord Robertson's question about what the government is committing in the way of weapons to Ukraine for 2024, the Foreign Secretary made lots of nice phrases and comments. But I wonder if the Foreign Secretary can actually answer Lord Robertson's question: what commitment can the Lord Foreign Secretary make in terms of what weapons and how much are we spending on weapons for 2024 for Ukraine?
Well, I thank my noble friend for the question. I don't have the figure here for what 2024 will provide. All I can say is we are absolutely committed to continuing to support Ukraine at the level or even ahead of what we've done. And to be clear about this, it's not just the scale of support, it's the type of support. One of the things the UK has done, and I pay tribute to my successors as Prime Minister in this, is always being ahead of the game. Lots of people were worried about giving them NLAW anti-tank missiles. We went ahead and did it. Then others did. Lots of people were worried about giving support in terms of tanks. We did it and others followed. Same again with long-range artillery, and crucially the same again with the Storm Shadow missiles, the long-range fires so-called, which have made such a difference right across the battle space. So we'll continue to support them at that level, asking them what it is they most need and making sure our support is effective.
I just want to reiterate, as I have done before, our full support for the government's actions, militarily and economically, and humanitarian support for Ukraine. But the Noble Lord said we must remain ahead of the game. And one clear thing that we need to ensure is that the people who have caused this war, the government that has caused this war, pays for the rebuilding of Ukraine. And of course, the EU has already set out a plan to repurpose Russian frozen assets. Canada has passed laws to do it, and the US has drafted laws to do it. So when will we see this government act and not be behind the game?
Well, let me thank the Noble Lord for his question. I think it's an extremely important point. It's one of the things I've looked at since taking office. I'm going to Washington this week and we'll be discussing that specific point with my counterparts in the United States, because to me it's clear, this is confiscated money that is for the benefit that should be taken away from the Russians that possess it and should be used instead, as it were, of reparations coming later. Use it as a down payment now. Now, of course, there are all sorts of legal concerns, all sorts of concerns about precedent, all sorts of concerns about chilling effects on investment and the rest of it. But I'm with him, as it were, on the moral and emotional stance that this is the right thing to do. Let's see if we can get it done.
My Lords, I wonder if the Noble Lord the Minister could comment on his department's assessment of reports that not only has Turkey vastly increased its trade with Russia, but also that Turkish ports are being used for arms smuggling and in some cases exporting dual-purpose goods into Russia, thereby helping them. I wonder what the assessment is and what we might be able to do about that.
Well, can I thank the Right Reverend Prelate for his question? I think he's absolutely right. One of the things we have to do is look right across the world at where there is potential for countries exporting dual-use goods and other goods of concern to Russia so that they could build more weapons and build more drones and all the rest of it. And he's absolutely right that there are concerns about Turkey. I raised those specifically with the Turkish Foreign Minister when I met him recently at the NATO conference. There are also concerns about other countries, and I can tell him and all noble lords we're going through country by country, concern by concern, and trying to track down where those dual-use goods are coming from and trying to take the appropriate measures, including sanctions where necessary.
Question, Lord Fowkes of Cumberland.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, the UK's position is clear. The Belarusian regime must release all political prisoners immediately and unconditionally and ensure free and fair elections. The UK has led international pressure on Belarus. We co-founded the International Accountability Platform for Belarus to build the evidence of the brutal repression that the regime is responsible for. We've sanctioned over 100 individuals and entities for human rights violations, and we co-sponsored UN resolutions and investigations at the OSCE in Vienna to shine a spotlight on human rights in Belarus.
My Lords, I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for that answer as far as it goes. But we must never forget that Lukashenko and his regime supported the Russians in the illegal invasion of Ukraine. And they have imprisoned over 1,500 people, including Stepan Latipov, who I have adopted under the Libereco adoption scheme. And these prisoners have no immediate prospect of release. And meanwhile, Lukashenko's cronies are going around the world, travelling, acquiring assets freely. Now, the government over the last 2 years, the UK government, have said they're going to impose more individual sanctions on the Lukashenko cronies, but nothing has happened. Will the government now look at increasing the sanctions to make sure that pressure is put on to the Lukashenko regime?
Well, first of all, let me say to the noble lord that I completely admire what he has done to keep the spotlight on Belarus and the work he and others have done on the all-party group. I think it is hugely to his credit and to the House's credit. What I would say is we have sanctioned 182 individuals and entities. We keep looking at what more can be done. We never announce potential names or sanctions before we do them, for obvious reasons, but we keep it under review. I'm looking at it very carefully. And he's right, we should be clear. This is Europe's totalitarian regime. They randomly confiscate people's mobile phones to see who they've been contacting, what social media they're following. Trade unions have been dissolved and their leaders imprisoned. Waving a Ukrainian flag is against the law and can result in a jail sentence. And there are 1,500 people who are political prisoners. So we absolutely agree with the aim of his question, and we will keep using the sanctions and other tools as appropriate.
I also welcome the Foreign Secretary to his position, and I agree with him with regards to the Belarus regime. Can I remind him what he said in his famed immigration speech when he said, I quote, "We will introduce a new visa to roll out the red carpet for those that offer serious investment to the UK. We now know that a number of Belarus business people bought a very large proportion of London property as a result of this golden visa route. I have supported every Belarus sanction that we have debated in this House, but there is nothing in the government's new development white paper that offers any new support for human rights defenders or democracy activists within this conflict. So why is that the case? And can the Foreign Secretary reassure me that of those 182 individuals that he mentioned, Not a single one currently continues to enjoy UK preferential visa access.
Well, let me make the point to the noble lord. You asked an important question, which is, yes, of course we introduced entrepreneur visas to try and attract bright talent to the UK to help grow the economy, but that does not mean you should give visas to people who've come by that money wrongly. And actually one of the things I did do as Prime Minister was announce the London Property Register, which is now coming in, that's going to make a huge difference in terms of confiscating people's ill-gotten gains and returning it to the countries and to the people from which it came so they can benefit. On his specific question, I'm very happy to take that way and look at it more. But I think it is important to recognise we use the sanctions, we'll keep using the sanctions, and we're watching closely what Belarus is doing.
I also welcome the Foreign Secretary to his new role, and I am glad to hear of his concern about political prisoners and the use of sanctions against those who are responsible largely for their being incarcerated. I raise in that context the fact that Lukashenko currently is visiting China and visiting President Xi. And so I'm concerned as to whether we're making the same efforts in relation to the sanctioning of people responsible for imprisoning people, for example in Hong Kong, and using national security law, because Jimmy Lai is there in prison facing trumped-up charges, and he was a voice for democracy in Hong Kong. And I just wondered, in the short period of time when you've been in your office, have you got to know about Jimmy Lai, and are you raising issues about his incarceration?
I thank the noble lady for her question. Yes, I am aware of the case of Jimmy Lai, and it's very important that we raise these cases, including that one, when we have interactions with the Chinese government, and that's exactly what I've done.
Can I bring the Foreign Secretary back to the issue of sanctions as raised by the noble Lord Fuchs? And I speak as somebody who's also a godparent to one of the political prisoners in Belarus. He's spoken of the sanctions, and I think he's aware of the concerns of the loopholes that have been exposed in that. I think what the House would like to know is whether or not he is personally confident that, having identified those, the government is now more effective in monitoring and enforcement. Because they're not effective, if they're not properly enforced, if they're not properly monitored, there's really very little point. So can he say if he is personally confident in their effectiveness, and if he isn't, can he say what measures he will take to improve the position?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for what she said. The Honourable Lady for what she said. Noble Lady, sorry. I'll get there eventually. I haven't asked the office specifically for a sort of analysis of the weakness of the sanctions and travel bans and asset freezes that we put in place, but with the question she asked, I'm very happy to go and do that to see if there are ways that the system isn't working. I think with all these things we have to sense check them. I would just say one thing, which is the thing I announced about the International Accountability Platform for Belarus. That sort of sounds like a sort of terrible set of initials, but what that actually is making sure that we're supporting all the NGOs and others that are looking at all the human rights abuses in Belarus, so that they are properly charted and written down, so they may be able to form the case of criminal cases against people working in that regime into the future. I just think it's important to do that, but I'll certainly take away the point she makes.
She will be aware that President Lukashenko and President Putin are the only members of an exclusive club of leaders whose countries do not recognize the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. Does he share the view of the former Home Secretary that we should join that club?
I can go back as far as 2005 and point the noble lord to speeches that I made that said, you know, we always have to put our national interest first, whether that is the need to deport dangerous terrorists, whether it is the need to have an immigration policy that works for our country. I believe that is consistent with remaining in the ECHR, but as I found as Prime Minister, there are occasions when the ECHR makes judgments, as they did on the issue of prisoner votes, when they said that it was absolutely essential that we legislated instantly to give prisoners the vote. And I said I didn't think that was the case. I think that should be settled by Houses of Parliament, and the ECHR backed down. So that sort of flexibility may well be necessary in the future.
My Lords, Foreign Secretary be aware that the incredibly evil and vile Wagner Group were allowed to move to Belarus after the mutiny in Russia was resolved. Does he share my concern about this? And would he raise this with the US Secretary of State when he sees him next week?
Well, I think my the noble lord is absolutely right. My noble friend is absolutely right that Belarus has been the #1 supporter of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and they should be held for account. They should be held to account for that. And I was certainly happy to raise that issue with Secretary Blinken when I see him this week.
Can I take the noble Lord the Minister back to a previous answer he gave around the property register, which is indeed a very important step forward in terms of understanding whether corrupt individuals from Belarus or elsewhere are buying property in the UK. He may be aware that there are concerns that people can still hide behind beneficial trusts. As Foreign Secretary, will he work with his colleagues in government to try and get us to the next stage of transparency so corrupt individuals are not able to buy property and still hide their ownership?
I thank the noble lord for his question. I'm very happy to take that away. I mean, I think actually the government I led and this government has made progress on this. As he says, we've got the register of property. A number of properties have therefore been taken back from their owners, and that money has been returned to the countries from which it's been stolen. And added to that, of course, we've got the registers of beneficial ownership, including the public registers of beneficial ownership, which I announced back at the G8 in 2013, and we are making huge progress on that globally and also with our own overseas territories, and we need to do the same with our Crown dependencies. All of this is essential if we're going to fight corruption.
Third question, Baroness D'Souza.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing on the order paper in my name.
As the noble Baroness knows, the situation with respect to Afghanistan is very difficult. My officials engage with the regime on priorities, including humanitarian access, without conferring any legitimacy on the Taliban. We're reviewing the recommendations of the UN Special Coordinator's report to support the Afghan people and improve international relations. Specifically on the question of Pakistan deportation of Afghan refugees, we do not support these actions. I met with the Pakistan Foreign Minister on Friday in Dubai and raised this question with him. Pakistan does have a history of welcoming vulnerable refugees, and we will continue to urge the government to respect the human rights of all Afghans.
I thank the noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, for his answer. My Lords, the lack of recognition of the Taliban Authority has inadvertently provided the Taliban and Pakistan with unrestricted freedom and influence over policies in Afghanistan. And a current concern, as the noble Lord has pointed out, is the enforced resettlement of thousands of refugees from Pakistan to Afghanistan. The Taliban policy of relocating Shia minorities in Sunni areas has dangerous implications, my Lords. What measures, including further negotiations with the Pakistan government, can the UK government take to avert potential religious and other conflicts in the region?
Well, I thank the noble lady for her question and her deep interest in this subject. I think the reason the Pakistan government is doing this is they are concerned about the activities of the Pakistan Taliban within Afghanistan. And this is their way of trying to get the Taliban government to address that. One of the points I made to them is that might well be counterproductive, and we think this is the wrong move. So what I can say to her is we will continue to raise this with the Pakistan authorities at every level and on every occasion. Obviously, we have a very specific British interest to make sure that any of those people, Afghans who worked for our authorities in Afghanistan, who have a right to come and settle here under any of the two schemes we have, that they are not inadvertently pushed back into Afghanistan. That's our sort of #1 concern. On the issue of the regime and recognition, I'm sure there'll be other questions about this, but I mean, fundamentally, is the House knows that Foreign Office always says that we recognise states and not governments, which is, I know, right. But on this occasion, when you look at this regime, and what it is responsible for. It bans women from working for the United Nations. It's the only country in the world to ban girls from secondary school. It restricts access of women to parks, playgrounds, other public spaces, and has a complete ban on women attending university. So I think we're some way off that move of ever recognising this regime. We need to keep the pressure on for it to change its approach.
My Lords, Evan.
The Noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, may recall when he was Prime Minister meeting members of Afghanistan Commando Force 333, a counter-narcotics unit that later became a counter-insurgency unit, created, trained, mentored and funded by His Majesty's government. He'll be appalled to know that former and deserving members of CF 333 and the similarly created and funded ATF 444 wrongly were refused resettlement under the Arab process. Abandoned, several have been killed and or tortured. About 100 333 and 444 rejected applicants are in Pakistan, fearing imminent deportation and a death sentence. Will he agree to meet with me and a delegation of noble and gallant lords and ladies so that we can explain the compelling case for an urgent review of the rejected or rescinded approvals of their settlement application?
Well, I thank the Noble Lord for his question, and of course he has great experience of this, having been the Defence Secretary for a prolonged period when we were in that fight in Afghanistan, and he knows exactly about the issues he's raising. What I'm very happy to take away the point he makes about those two units and to look at them specifically. What I can tell him is that under the Afghan relocations and assistance policy, the Arab scheme, I think 12,200 people have been repatriated so far, and of course there's the Foreign Office scheme for which I'm responsible, which is the Afghan citizen resettlement scheme, which has the capacity of up to 20,000 people. So I'm very happy to take away the specific points that he makes and see what we can do to help.
My Lords, after 9/11, when the West went into Afghanistan, we encouraged the women to come forward and play their part in public life, and they bravely responded. As my noble friend has just said, since the Taliban came in 2021, they've stopped women having access to education and they've basically pushed them back into their homes. Many are calling this gender apartheid. How are we going to assure that the women of Afghanistan can play their part in their country going forward?
Well, I thank my noble friend for her question. I mean, it's appalling how women are treated in Afghanistan, and I gave some of the points earlier about access to school, access to education, to university, even to public spaces. And I think we have to use the maximum leverage that we do have. And of course, while we do need to help people in Afghanistan who are facing very, very great food insecurity and huge difficulties in terms of shelter and livelihoods, and we are helping, we can do that through United Nations organizations rather than through the government of Afghanistan. I think we should continue to do that and use the pressure we have to say to the regime that it needs to change its ways with respect to women and girls.
Foreign Secretary just mentioned the ban.
The Foreign Secretary has already mentioned that there is a danger of people who have Arab entitlement who are in Pakistan being sent back to Afghanistan, and hoping that we can persuade Pakistan not to let them go back. Could he show the House the government's commitment to people who have Arab entitlement or ACRS entitlement, and talk with his honourable friends in the other place, the Home Secretary, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, and the Cabinet Office, about ensuring that every single person who has Arab entitlement is able to come from Pakistan or Afghanistan to this country? What are we doing? Because we owe those people.
The noble lady is completely right. This is a cross-government effort. We have to make sure we identify these people, we contact these people and let them know about their right to come and live here. And then we have to work out across the different departments of government how to make sure that can happen in a way that works for them and their families. And I can tell her that that's exactly what's happening in government at the moment.
My Lords, when the noble Lord just mentioned the ban on UN aid workers in Afghanistan. And in January, I'm glad to see the noble Lord Ahmed here, in January, in response to an urgent question, he stressed the need for the Islamic world to speak out. Therefore, I welcome very much his recent discussions with the Pakistan authorities, but can he tell us what he's doing to support the Noble Lord Ahmed in ensuring that we expand that, ensure that other voices are heard, and condemning this isolated regime from banning women from attending hospitals and other humanitarian support is incredibly damaging.
Well, I think from what I've seen in the last 3 weeks is that the Noble Lord, my noble friend, is incredibly active in his travels, particularly around the Middle East, North Africa, and much of the Muslim world, and is an incredibly effective spokesman for the government to actually try and make a change on these issues. I think one of the things that's necessary is to make sure that those states who often privately speak very frankly about these things, that it becomes part of their public narrative. And I think the work we do on that will be really essential.
My Lords, now that the government has helpfully dropped its requirement that suitable housing in the UK be secured before Afghans may travel from Pakistan to the UK, and returning to what the Noble Lord described as his #1 priority, could he tell the House how many UK visas have been issued to those Afghans trapped in Pakistan who we know qualify under one of the 2 main schemes that we've initiated since the policy was reversed on housing requirements?
I thank the noble lady for her question. I don't have the figures since that change, but the overall figures are that Arup has seen 12,200 people repatriated, and the ACRS scheme has a capacity of 20,000. Perhaps I can keep her up to date and the House up to date about the figures as they progress. We're obviously doing everything we can to contact those people who are on the Pakistan-Afghan border, but I think it is important at the same time to make clear to the Pakistan government that it would be unacceptable for them to deport anybody that has the right to come here.
4th question, Baroness Way.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, last week I met with Vice President Šefčovič, where we discussed issues including the Windsor Framework and support for Ukraine and the Middle East. An important part of my role is to make the UK-EU relationship work to deliver on UK interests, including on migration, energy security and trade. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement remains the basis of our relationship with the EU, and we are committed to maximising its opportunities.
My Lords, I welcome the Noble Lord very much, particularly because I know he's committed very strongly to the Union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and also because he's the only member of the Cabinet who hasn't had anything to do with either the protocol or the Windsor Framework. So he comes with clean hands. But I do hope that the Foreign Secretary, the Noble Lord, does understand the difficulties that the Windsor Frame is causing to people in Northern Ireland, businesses not sending goods to Northern Ireland anymore, and the breakup of the internal UK market. So could I ask him to give a commitment to the people of Northern Ireland when he next meets the European Union, that he will actually talk to them about alternatives which could be brought forward with modern technology, with trust and with common sense that could do away with the Irish Sea border and not be dividing our own country?
Well, can I thank the noble lady for her question and say it's very nice to be reunited with her. My first job in politics was actually the candidates researcher at the Vauxhall by-election, where she got elected and my office was picketed every day by local residents. So, but at least we've ended up in the same place. Look, as she said, I had nothing to do with negotiating the Windsor Framework, and so I can say this with true meaning. I think it was a superb negotiation. I mean, the EU never said it would never reopen the withdrawal agreement, and they did. They never, and I say this with real feeling, give an emergency break. And yet they did when it came to Stormont. And they never really make exceptions for single market access for non-single market countries, and yet they have. So I absolutely understand her concerns and worries about it, but I think it was a good negotiation. I think it can fulfill the 7 tests that the Democratic Unionists have put forward. And I know my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, is working extremely hard to try and put the institutions back together again.
My Lords.
My lords, my lords.
The Foreign Secretary mentioned that one of the areas of common interest was indeed migration. Given the signing of a treaty with Rwanda today, could the Foreign Secretary tell the House what discussions he had with the EU and its member states on that? And can he also tell the House whether Parliament will have the choice to debate and agree that new treaty?
What I'd say to the noble lady is one of the things I think has most changed in my 7-year absence from all of this is that the debate within EU countries about migration has completely changed. Many more of them are extremely worried about the scale of illegal migration and the need to do some quite creative thinking about how you can deal with this problem. So, yes, I did speak about this with Commissioner Šefčovič. I fully support what the government is doing because we have to stop these illegal boat crossings. There is nothing more destructive to a country's immigration system than to have a continued and very visible amount of illegal migration. And so I think that the approach that is being taken to break the criminal gangs and their ability to say to people, we will get you to the shore of the UK and from then on you're safe, we have to stop that. And that's what the Rwanda plan is all about. And I'm sure it can be debated to great extent in this House, and I'm sure my colleagues will be very happy to take part.
My Lord.
Thank you very much. My Lords, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement contained a structure of 24 committees that were going to assist the process of the trade. And following the Windsor Framework Agreement, the European Affairs Committee of this House produced a report about the future of the relationship between the UK and the EU. I do hope that the Noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, will have a chance to read that report. One of the key themes within that report was getting these 24 committees really humming and meeting, and their structures meeting as well, and transacting so that there could be mutual benefit to both sides in improving the trading relationship. I wonder if the Noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, could give us a sense of whether that is now happening, and give us also a sense about his determination to keep it going.
Well, I thank the Noble Lord for his question. I think that what I'd say is these structured dialogues do seem to work. Only yesterday, the one on citizenship met, I think for the 14th time, and made some important progress. So I think there's a role for those, but I also think there's a role for using all the connections and structures that we have and other meetings we have to try and push forward British interests. And for instance, with my meeting with Commissioner Šefčovič, there's this whole issue about having an energy partnership. I think that's an excellent idea, but we've really got to get to grips quickly with electricity trading. It makes sense. If we've got these interconnectors, let's trade the electricity, let's try and have lower prices here and lower prices there. It's an obvious example of, win-win cooperation, as it were, but a more structured dialogue at the same time, of course. And I'll certainly read the report to which he refers, which I haven't yet seen.
My lords. My
noble friend. I'm delighted that my noble friend decided to come to this place, a decision that is probably much wiser than the one he made when he sent me here. May I ask him about relations with Greece? And I declare my interest in the Register and as a member of the Parthenon project, whose objective is to create a privately funded foundation to encourage exchanges of teachers and professors and students between our two countries, and also to share in our priceless cultural objectives and artifacts, which include the Elgin marbles. Yes, it's not just the loony left. May I simply say that in our really crappy world, is it not right that we should reach out and use as much power, soft power, as we can to reforge and strengthen our relations with our old friends?
Well, I thank my noble friend for his question. I well remember sending him here because a week later we lost a vote by 1, and he was the responsible noble lord. And I remember having some words with him after that, although clearly that had absolutely no effect at all. Look, I don't agree with him about what he says about the Elgin marbles. The government has a very clear position on that has been set out. I met the Greek foreign minister while I was at the NATO conference, and we had a great discussion about all the other aspects of our relationship where we're strong friends, allies and partners.
Lords, the Foreign Secretary, when he spoke of the issues that he was talking to the EU about, I think left off one very important one, perhaps the most significant, which that was the issue of international security. Can I take him back to those halcyon days of May 2016? He will recall them well, during the height of the EU referendum campaign, and he was then clear that, and I quote him, much closer security cooperation between our European allies and nations is essential. Now, given his previous commitment, I was surprised he didn't mention it in the list of things he was looking at the moment, but can he say what he will do to renew and strengthen that security relationship between the EU and the UK, and including, is he willing to consider to negotiate a EU-UK security pact that will complement our commitment to NATO?
Well, I had a feeling that some of my past words might be served up for me, and I'm sure, as another former Prime Minister said, they'll make a very fulfilling and satisfying diet as I eat them. What I would say is, yes, we did talk about security issues. Specifically, we talked about security in the Western Balkans when I met with Commissioner Šefčovič. What I would say is, look, I think Ukraine is perhaps one of the greatest elements of proof that the UK can make this relationship of friend, neighbour and partner, rather than member, make that relationship with the EU work. We coordinate with them very closely on how we support Ukraine, on how we sanction Russians and all the rest of it. And so, of course, that is part of the relationship. The other thing, frankly, that's changed is that NATO has had an enormous boost from Putin's actions. It is now bigger and stronger with new members joining, and that is the ultimate guarantee of our security.
My Lords, the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly met in the last 2 days.
And I'm certain, my Lords, that the Foreign Secretary has some sympathy in understanding that the agreement has been a fairly harsh blow to the British overseas territories. I apologise that I missed his maiden speech in this House because I was in the Falkland Islands, and they told me that for their fishing industry, the largest part of the economy of the Falkland Islands, they are now spending over £15 million a year to be Spanish-flagged vessels as a result of the lack of access to the EU market, which is their largest. I understand that the Foreign Secretary will be visiting the Falkland Islands, so will he take to them the good news that he will now negotiate an agreement that means that British fishermen on British vessels fishing in British waters will not have to do so under a Spanish flag?
Well, I'm happy to thank the Noble Lord for his question. I can tell him that Minister Rutley from my department was actually in the Falklands just a couple of days ago. I'll certainly take away the point that he makes. I'm very committed to working with all our overseas territories. We had them all in the Foreign Office just a couple of weeks ago to discuss a whole range of issues, and I'm happy to add that to the list.
That concludes Secretary of State questions for today.